Adrian, thank you for the point. It's fairly given. Let's see if others who perhaps have been to Russia or have an idea of what Russian society is like will call us, because, of course, that's one of the easiest comparisons we have to a Big Brother, a totalitarian society. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make the point that the speaker said something about 1984 being just around the corner, and a lot of people say that, we're not all that far from 1984. I think that George Orwell wrote that book, and I think he said it himself in his essays, that the book was intended to point out the life of his time. That was 1948 when the book was written, and point out things that were happening.
Absolutely right.
Now, of course, the day will probably never come when we've all got television screens in our houses. I don't think there's any reason to sort of believe that we're living a good life now. I think our lives are controlled by politicians, and the media just feeds us rubbish. We don't get the truth on the media about the bombs and the wars. And there's, of course, the previous caller was going on about Russia. I think that America and our country just oppress the people just in a far better way, far more efficient way. They don't need to bludgeon people because we're just all placated with all the rubbish that's on television and sold in the shops.
Of course, it's a moot philosophical point. If people are acquiescent, then they can't be described as being downtrodden, can they? But let's perhaps not dwell on that. I mean, let me just, if you want to refer to 1984 as a book, I suppose, Andrew, you do have the freedom to go and make love in the woods without being observed by secret microphones and cameras, for example, whereas Winston in 1984 didn't have that freedom.
Yeah, of course, and that's why I'm saying that the book is not intended as a prediction. It's just intended as a thought-provoking piece. Now, George Orwell, I read another George Orwell book. I'm not a great reader, but having read 1984, I was encouraged to see what else he'd written. And Coming Up for Air, that's a beautiful book, and I'd recommend that to everybody, in which he describes his childhood before the First World War. And he says that in those days they didn't have the fear of the bomb being, held over their heads. And, I think it's sad that the previous caller sort of, to put her point, had to say about Russia, nasty old Russia, therefore our country is good. I think that people should just stand back from all the craziness in the world and see what's wrong with their own places they're living. Just because the Russians have a hard time doesn't mean that we're living in the wonderful land of free. I think that the terrible evil, all the armaments in the world and the good that could be done with that money and that intelligence, I don't think anybody seems to consider that.
Well, can I just butt in here, Andrew, and say this to you, that I agree with you entirely, and that Orwell's book was not a prediction. You're quite right. And Orwell himself said before he died that it was never intended as a prediction. In fact, it was a parody of his own time. And what he was looking at were the totalitarian states that existed then. But remember, there were two at that time, during his time. There was, on the one hand, there was Russia, as Adrian said before, but there was another one at the time too, and that was Hitler. And what Orwell did was parody and try and make a mockery of, by exaggerating the technology that existed then on both sides. Now, if you notice in Big Brother or in 1984, that Orwell doesn't really tell you what the party is. So it can equally be right or left. So, as I say, I agree with you entirely in what you say about Orwell. Not a prophecy, but not an intended prophecy. One of the things we've got to be careful about, that it doesn't become an inadvertent prophecy.
Andrew, you're not suggesting, I would imagine, that we don't live in a freer society here than Russian citizens do.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all, but the price we pay is that we're bludgeoned with American rubbish. In fact, we are ruled by America in that sense, that about 90% of our entertainment, so-called entertainment, seems to come from America, and every night you can watch a program where people are beating each other up.
Yes, you just said every night you can watch.
Yeah.
But every night you can't if you don't want to.
I think you've put your finger on the basic freedom, haven't you?
People feed off that sort of thing. It is an addiction. If that's dished up as their only form of entertainment, they will come to accept that, and it's acceptable. Violence on the television every night is acceptable. It's an acceptable part of our way of life, our culture. And it's a very sad thing. I'm not saying that we're living in a less the same sort of society as Russia. I'm just saying that where Russian people may be downtrodden, and we're just placated, our minds are nuns. That's why I'm saying that our system downtreads people in a far more efficient way.
Well, let's see how others respond to that. I think that what you have expressed is a popular opinion. It's perhaps a rather simple one. That's the only criticism I would level at it, frankly, because we've already made the point about the off button. You do have that freedom. And there are a lot of people, Andrew, who do in this society, and even in American society, which I accept has more restraints, perhaps, than our own. In some ways, there seems to be a willingness there to, on the part of government, at least as shown up in, for example, the Watergate affair, and before that, the way that Senator McCarthy explored people's lives without actually adopting the rule of law as the basis on which he started.
In fact, no one criticises American society more openly than the Americans themselves. So that seems to say a lot about the society they live in, I think.
But what I'm trying to get out of you, Andrew, is the admission that you do have a freedom here to avoid the dictate of Big Brother.
Well, no, you're right that I can make love in the woods, but it doesn't mean that I can avoid the dictate of Big Brother.
I was only using that as one example. There are a lot of things you can do which are not normal, not conventional. Yeah,
I can have different coloured hair. I can go to church, but then again, the church is another weapon against people speaking.
But you can read any book you like.
You can speak on the radio and voice your views.
I can read any book that's printed.
Yes, actually, you can read almost any book you like, frankly. That's what it amounts to. I can't think of the last time a book was actually suppressed in Britain, unless perhaps by the legal system's attitude to libel, which is a kind of interpersonal thing.
You're missing the point. The books don't have to be suppressed if the people are suppressed, if the multi-million-pound media, when hundreds of thousands of people protest against bombs, it only takes a few of the vicious minority in power, the politicians, who are in control of the television and newspapers and what we read, and the newspapers are owned by the well-heeled. That can just swamp any... the public are fickle, and when they're swamped by such lies that are in the press, you don't need to suppress books, because the whole of our culture is based in suppression.
Andrew, it's an important point. I want others to take it up. 3538111 is the number we have in the studio. Ian Will, a security consultant who's been exploring both the technology and the preconditions for an Orwellian Big Brother society, and has come to the rather startling and chilling conclusion that unless we're careful, we might slip over the edge.